Welcome to Earth, a Love Story. I'm your host, Robin Lassiter. On this episode of the podcast, Mike Fiorito returns to talk about his wonderful new book, For All We Know. Before I get into that introduction and the interview, I have some, what do they call it, like housekeeping? Let's call it something else, fire tending. I have some fire tending to take care of. New things to tell you about. My work, my podcast, my entire self is going through a monumental change. I have not had a threshold crossing like this in a really long time. And honestly, now that I know how these things go, and I have faith that there's something extraordinary on the other side, I am deeply enjoying it, even with the discomfort that necessarily arises in such things. This threshold crossing is a burning away. Fire tending. It's a burning away of anything that does not resonate with the new space, frequency, center of self that I'm inhabiting. And what that means in real life terms is a few things. One, the podcast is also going to shift frequency a bit. There will still be interviews with amazing people that I find interesting and inspiring, and whose voices transmit something that I can feel in my bones needs to be transmitted. And also, I will be doing more solo episodes, creating a clearer context for you about this journey that I've been on thousands of times and continues to reveal itself to me as a deeply human, radical, revolutionary blueprint for how to navigate this time on the planet. I'm going to be doing a lot less caveating and a lot more speaking plainly about what I believe and know to be true for me and a collective of us. I'm collapsing the narrative, but just a little. Not down to a solid belief system that will concretize and die, but into a lens, a focus, a portal, a living portal, so that we can all get our bearings. So stay tuned for these new episodes and that new energy that is infusing me and will infuse this podcast. The next episode will be a solo one and is titled The Final Death of the Small Self. The story of my final surrender into life as I know it to be, and a story that was not in my book and I've never told publicly. Also, the Bridge Collective. The Bridge Collective has been and is being completely transformed, reborn as well. At first I thought that in order to transmit this blueprint, I needed to teach you guys something. And honestly, that felt really stressful and like a whole lot to hold. What I've been shown is that the Bridge Collective itself will inform us all. And you guys don't need to be taught anything. It is already alive in you, just like it is in me. What I will do is hold the framework, the context, the container, so that we can travel in these other lands together as safely as possible while building true connection in the we space that we can feel is arising on the planet right now. Moving from me to we is a core piece of this work. And in order for the Bridge Collective to be authentic and powerful, it necessarily has to contain the seeds of that. Details are coming soon to those of you on the waiting list, I promise. And if you haven't signed up but you'd like to, I'll put the link in the show notes. There's still time. In fact, I think this is going to be like a rolling collective that will be available to us whenever we need it. So this offering is still in the fire, getting tempered and strong and lithe, but it's coming so soon. I originally thought we'd start in late June, and I am still thinking that it will start then. Maybe the solstice? Maybe. It's so close to being ready. So please hang in there with me. This is work that is coming through my alive body. Like, I'm a person with a body. It's a process. This is not business as usual the way that the overculture does it. This is like we're stepping into something alive and unknown. And you can't rush these things. So please stay with me. I'm beyond excited to see what we'll create together, the stories that we will tell that will seed the future that is not yet written, and that's on the other side of the crumbling of the old ways that we're going to create together as we walk across this bridge. So exciting. So many thresholds to cross. Okay, that's it for the fire tending. Mike Fiorito is a freelance journalist and the author of several books, including his newest, For All We Know. He's also written Mescalito Riding His White Horse, Falling from Trees, The Hated Ones, Sleeping with Fishes, Call Me Guido, Freud's Haberdashery Habits, and Hallucinating Huxley. Mescalito Riding His White Horse received the 2024 Independent Press Distinguished Favorite Award in Spirituality, and I originally interviewed Mike about that book for episode 31 of this podcast. Falling from Trees received the 2022 Independent Press Distinguished Favorite Award in Short Stories. His UFO-themed science fiction novel, For All We Know, is now available for pre-order. It's always a pleasure when I get to talk to Mike, and I hope that you enjoy.
I started playing with some graphics tools and some artificial intelligence tools, and probably did 1,000 of those images.
Oh, wow.
Or so,
wow.
In my obsessive compulsive way.
You're training AI. That's
right,
cool.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm teaching it for free.
Yes, yeah.
I was curious to play with it and to, it's coming like a tidal wave. It's, have you read Diana Pasulka's newest book?
Encounters?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm reading it now. I haven't finished it.
But she embraces AI. I think there's a definite danger to it, in ways that we may not even know yet, but in ways that we do know, deep fakes. And, it's going to be tricky to know what's real. I mean, it already is, but it's going to be very tricky, I think, to discern.
I agree with you. It's kind of taps into my newest obsession right now, which is the real world, whatever that is, right? That's in quotes or taken with a grain of salt, like even to define what the real world is, but the world without, that's not kind of modulated through a screen and that's experienced directly versus this other access that we have to, to things that are also real. Like it's all real, but really been noticing like how the body responds to being just in the world, and even, taking walks or exercising without music or without listening to a podcast, and just trying to take more space away from the constant stream that's coming into my brain, in order to, what we will, I think, always have is experience. So even though it's hard to tell like what's real and what's not out there, direct experiences, as that is rising, like my direct experience is becoming more important to me. And I feel like a baby. Like I feel like I forgot how to do it,
Yeah, and I and it's refreshing and rejuvenating. It was before, maybe a month ago or so. So in New York City, when the seasons change, when we get into fall, the birds really, they vacate. When we get to the end of fall, you go from a month ago, about the bird noises start to arrive because they come from north. They start going south, and we have a pretty large tree population, and actually a large bird population. But it's become palpable because, frankly, I wasn't one to pay attention to these things. I described that in the book too. But as I walked out, I heard the chirping of the birds and the song and the symphony of sounds. And I just, then I took my headset off, and it just felt like, you're back. It's been a while, And then what you have is, so I don't know how it is in other places. I mean, I did live in California, but you didn't have the change of seasons like you do here. But the bird sounds will just begin to, the whole spring will just bring life flourishing back. But it's particularly the bird sounds and the amount of variety and the quantity of birds. And frankly, I think they're trying to tell us something, Robin. No, I'm serious. I really think that there's language and communication in there. But we're with our telescopes, we're like, I can't find any intelligent life in the universe. Let me release my lens here, put another lens on. As it's all like around us, right? All this intelligence and bristling and, full of life.
Yeah. I have so much to say just about your book, and but this is such a great place to start because it's what a lot of your book is talking about. And yes, that I've had that experience as well. As spring is arriving, I've very clearly noticed the birds that are coming back. I haven't been here in this valley consistently and for a long time until recently. I'm starting my second spring here. Just went through my second winter in the dome. And so for me, I don't think I noticed it last year. But this year, I definitely am noticing the birds returning. Another thing that happens is as it starts to get warmer, even now there's still snow on the ground in patches, but it's getting warmer and like the spiders are out. There's just a ton of walking through the fields. There's spiders everywhere. And yeah, you saying that makes me think of a book that I talk about a lot, David Abrams' book, Spell of the Sensuous, and how when we notice the world, it seems to notice us back, which is also something that is said about the phenomenon in general.
Yes.
And I was reading his book last year, and he was talking about an encounter he had with a bird, and it was very much on my mind. And I went out to the garden, and I was in the garden, and I kind of stopped and did this practice that I'm doing more and more lately, which is sort of broaden my peripheral vision and get less out of my like single focus eyes and head, and kind of started like looking around and listening with more of myself. And right at that moment, a hummingbird came right in front of my face and just
Interesting.
stayed there for a moment with me and then landed, not very far away. And hummingbirds are around here, but that was not a common experience that I've had. And it felt very like the world just became very animate and magical, seemingly in response to my noticing it. It was like, here we are,
right.
all the time. And the noticing seems to allow us to interact with it in a different way.
Yeah. During COVID, my wife and son, we started to take bike rides, and we would get out, and just partly because you're on a bike, so you're looking up. There's a road that takes us. It's hard for people sometimes to believe. In Brooklyn, there are trees, and there's a road that takes you to the park, to Prospect Park, and it's bowered. It's like you have trees on either side. And I started to pay attention to the trees and to the birds. And I started to look at the trees. I got the app that helps you identify. My wife grew up in slightly more, really just the suburbs, to be honest with you. But she knows more about tree types and bird types and stuff. So here I was, this like nascent child, what kind of, how do you identify the tree? And I'm looking at the bark, and she says, by its leaves. So then I started to get more confident, and I would say, what kind of bird is that? And she just knew more than I did. For me, it was just birds. They're birds. But I think it was eye-opening to, as nature was, it was nature at the end of the day. It was nature was ravaging around us. And this genie was let out of the bag, and was, here we were, and just isolated. It was very lonely, and you had this other world that I was paying attention to. Sad as that is, it took me that long, and it took me all of that. And also, I read other books too that enhanced some of this. Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass, and her other book, I forget, Gathering Moss. And I read a whole slew of those kinds of books. Marilyn Sheldrake's book, Entangled Life, I think it is, which actually finds its way into my book as well. The mycorrhizal loom that connects, the soil, the trees, and kind of creates this communication channel. Decomposes things to their elemental structure, and that just all fascinated me. So I write what fascinates me, like your work is you get into the nature, into the soil, and to your connection, your ancestral connection to that. So we have that in common, I think. That's when I read your book, I could see commonalities in
Hmm.
it's intimate, it's personal,
Yeah,
your connection. But if I'm
absolutely.
honest, it came later for me. So,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, what I've been realizing for myself is that all of this seems to just be deepening in waves. There's never an arrival point, you know. It's
mm,
because I grew up very, very connected to nature, but it wasn't until relatively recently that I started engaging with it in a more
mhm.
conscious way, a different kind of way. So yeah, just in what you've shared and talked about so far, there's a lot that connects in with your book.
Hmm.
I wonder how much like certainly somewhat autobiographical, even though it's a fiction book,
Yeah,
seems to talk about some of your direct experiences.
yeah. I think so. Number one, I'll say that, and then this is the case throughout all of my writing career is that I write about what fascinates me. I write about what happens as I get deep into a subject, and I'll read pile of books and I'm contemplating it. There's a real download, frankly, that's happening, and then it comes out of me. I drink it in, and then I sweat it out in the form of words and stories. Yeah, it's a couple of things on that note. One is that you cannot, no one will publish a UFO story that's a memoirish.
Hmm.
You'll have to self-publish that. So even the main publishers that that publish in the paranormal and ufology areas, if you want to publish that, you have to self-publish. So, and I don't want to self-publish for
Hmm.
a number of reasons. And also, I did not want to be limited to it's a fiction book. So, in order to get published by a press, and it's a fiction book, and I also didn't want to be constricted to have to write truthfully. My point was to take what I had been learning, from reading all these amazing books that were blowing my mind, books by Whitley Strieber, uh, books that you and I have been reading by Jeff Kripal, by Diana Pasulka, Bernardo Kastrup, your book, reading all these books, ingesting it, and now I'm not an academic, I didn't want to write a nonfiction. I am working on something nonfiction now,
Hmm.
but I didn't want to write a nonfiction book in this subject area. I felt the best way I could contribute was to have it come from something that's authentically my voice and that
Hmm.
weaves in the ideas. So the character, the narrator, yeah, it's because it's in first person. I think for a second. I mean, he's very much me. It's someone in the 70s, and I grew up in rough and tumble Queens. And there are reasons why I made those decisions. I wanted it to feel real. I wanted the journey. It's a spiritual path. It's a spiritual, arc that happens in this book, and it ends in a kind of, a big cataclysmic way. But I wanted this character to be not trustworthy, first of all. Like we're not always sure we believe what he's saying. Sometimes he's dopey. He's not in possession of all the facts. We know that, but he doesn't. And I wanted sometimes he doesn't argue well. So he has a discussion with his friend who's a skeptic, and he kind of collapses in the argument, It wouldn't be fun to me if he wins in the arguments all the time. Because to me it's a bit of a I'm engaging with this in a kind of it's almost a pedagogical way. I'm learning, hence the title, For All We Know, because I'm not coming out with absolutes. I'm questioning these things, and I'm also finding the other liminal spaces that connects to this topic. The idea of the shock of almost dying, having a gun put up to your head. It's interesting. John Mack he wrote about in Passport to the Cosmos how that shamans and people going through a spiritual journey they go through a shock. Something shocking happens. And it's sort of that shock, it shutters your notion of reality,
Mm-hmm.
and it opens up the door for other things. Now that shock can happen in different ways. It could be through, I mean, having a gun put up to your head is one way, for sure. Um, Losing someone very important to you, having the rug pulled from underneath you. You see people that go through a spiritual quest, usually something's happened first. Something shocked their world. A psychedelic substance, you take a psychedelic substance, it is going to shock your system. It is going to make you confront who you are. Having some kind of visitation of some kind, or a UFO experience, it shocks your world. And I wanted to kind of constellate these things into related subject and show how they're connected. I think some UFO, hardcores are going to be like, this isn't a UFO book. And, okay, it is to me, but I don't write on spec, and I don't want to give back. There are some great UFO memoir stories, and I go read them. Kathleen Martin's book is excellent. Highly recommend it. Ryan Sprague, I don't know how to pronounce his name. He has a book of stories. Excellent. And you can find them. I didn't want to reproduce those. I wanted to tell a different story that brings in what I think is related subject matter that perhaps is not being, included in the conversation currently. So that was sort of my objective. I don't know if I answered your question or just spoke a lot.
Perfect either way. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, your book to me is an experiencer book. It's something that, and it's interesting that you say that an experiencer can't publish like a memoir, which one of the highlights of writing my book was submitting it to a bunch of publishers and having one of them, who's a pretty, well-known publisher in this field, come back and say, experiencers cannot tell their own stories. They need to come through the third party of, an expert telling their story for them. And I thought, that is amazing that you said that out loud. That you
Yeah,
just
I know.
admitted that I'm not qualified to tell my story.
Right.
And I wasn't even mad. I was just astonished. I was like, wow, you just said it. And that was
Yeah.
when I decided, like, okay, I send it out, to a few other places, but no, I have to self-publish and I want to. And I had
Yeah.
great help doing it, but I understand why on some level experiencers are not being talked to really in or taken seriously, or
Mm-hmm.
the content of the experience, for a few reasons. One of them, it's just we're going to have to shift into a new paradigm in order for that to happen. And I think that's happening. It's just that we're not there yet. It
Mm-hmm.
really challenges worldviews. And if you haven't had an experience, it's very difficult to understand or believe that it's real. And also because of what it means for, I mean, it just kind of unravels everything if it's
Mm-hmm.
to be taken seriously, And so I get it. I get why it's that we're not at that point. And also it's just flourishing in the background. Like if we're holding up any sort of measurement against like official disclosure, which I really
Mm-hmm.
don't care a lot about. Yeah, experiencer stories aren't really being heard, but we all are. Like we're all having the conversation, and it's such a nuanced, deep, difficult, like paradoxical conversation to
Mm-hmm.
have that is not soundbitey. Like it's not possible
Right.
to collapse down into these easy narratives. So it requires real engagement. And our world is also not really set up that way. It's really,
Mm-hmm.
kind of set up for things to be. But there's a lot of people that are engaging with stuff like this in a really deep way and understanding, I think, pretty quickly. It seems to happen over the last few years that we've moved into a place where all of this stuff is starting to play together. Like
Mm-hmm. True.
having a psychedelic experience, like you're talking about, and like you go into beautifully in the book, describing these psychedelic experiences, bringing in the fluidity of time, the fact that like our temporal understanding isn't even exactly quite right, that our
Mm-hmm.
future affects the past as much as our past affects the future. And um yeah, UFOs, like bringing in Fae and uh,
Mm-hmm.
altered states of consciousness and all of these things, it seems to me in just the last few years is coming more into the mainstream in a way that they can all play together. And
Yeah.
that's brand new. And it's cool because it is so complex and people like, yeah, we're holding it. There are a lot of people who
Mm-hmm.
are able to hold that complexity. And that seems like a good thing for humans. It's
Yeah.
a
No, I
good thing for
agree.
humanity. Yeah.
And it's interesting. I think part of so one publisher said, and I forget it was. It's a big publisher in the paranormal space. Said we get too many of these submissions, so
Mm,
we don't publish them. And it also just underscores it's where we are as a materialist culture. We believe that if you can count it, if you can quantify it, if you can kind of put it in a box and then present it, then it has objectivity and integrity. Otherwise, this thing, this is just a user illusion.
mhm,
You have the main. I was a philosophy undergrad, and the main thrust, which still is in science, is a materialist view. So this notion that you matter and you count is kind of you you silly fool. I think it's way more complex than that. It's I mentioned Bernardo Kastrup. He wrote a book on the importance of absurdity, and
mm,
he talks a lot about the UFO phenomena in that book. We our science is actually for a long time has been kind of cul-de-sac into having to contend with living with things being not completely logical and absurd. A few examples. Light can be a wave and a particle. When we look at the quantum level, we go to the subatomic level, things get really weird. The observer influences the outcome. There seems to be some relationship to consciousness, and I'm going to connect this back to to UFO phenomena. Consciousness is somehow involved in the experiment, which is very strange.
mhm,
Einstein had a term, spookiness. He coined the term spookiness at a distance because subatomic particles seem to be communicating when they're born. They seem to communicate, and if you separate them, they still communicate. And the there was an experiment in Geneva because at first they had the particles very near each other, and they said, okay, maybe the proximity is allowing this. So they separated them by miles, kilometers, still communicating. What Einstein said is, oh, there must be a hidden variable. Let's just put a placeholder. I don't know, so
mm,
placeholder,
mhm,
dark matter. You ask someone what dark matter is, and by the way, I'm not a scientist. Should probably know. I'm just curious. I'm just curious about these things. Dark matter. What is dark matter? Dark matter is what scientists hypothesize because the math of the Big Bang is not working out. So it's like, okay, well, let's just placeholder dark
mhm,
matter. But to your point, even in you look at these stories that people have of these experiencer stories. Why would people tell these stories? Okay, maybe some people would, maybe some people, but you have people that are doctors that have positions. It doesn't matter who you are really, but you have a position where that kind of thing that having that stigma could be affect your professional career or something, or even just the way your friends and your family receives you. But people have these extraordinary stories, and they've been occurring since, we have been writing on cave walls across cultures, and it's different across cultures. It's differently received. In some cultures, it's, oh yeah, well, that's the stars that come, and they come from the sky and they visit. Yeah, this happens all the time. This is what they come, and they tell us things, they advise us. Um, but we in this Western, of course, I'm generalizing, but we have this very materialist notion of we are in control of the facts. As Bernardo Kastrup said, the materialists, the scientists, we've one-upped the universe. We've one-upped it. We gotcha. So living in that state of not knowing, of things maybe multiple things are true at once. Maybe it is both a metallic object or something, and it's also in our mind. And somehow that's connected, because consciousness is where I'm getting back to, is somehow playing, is a part of this whole, the phenomena. Somehow our consciousness is wrapped up in the universe itself, in the construction of the universe. Certainly our minds create the universe. Hold on, people, don't jump on me too quickly. But at the very basic level, just that the constructs of our minds create the universe as we experience it. But this idea that if you say to someone, here's what I thought about the other day, Robin. You say, hey, do you believe that there's non-human intelligence in the universe? Most people say, yeah, of course, yeah. Say, you know what's funny? I had an experience. I encountered a non-human intelligence. Then they'll go, okay, come on. Okay, you're crazy. So it's funny how that is. And I'm not judging. We live it's hard enough just to be alive in this world and to manage the everyday, getting by, our emotional lives, the people around us, making a living. When you throw something into the fray that says, okay, this potentially is a simulated experience of some kind, and your mind is co-constructing this reality, because we do have a shared experience. There's no doubt about that. But when you look deep into it, this is this phenomena. It sort of undermines the fundamental aspects of why are we here? Who are we? I think it's an opportunity for growth. And I'm not teaching anyone. I'm not here to say, well, you have to follow my 12-step program of, that's not at all what I'm saying. I mean, I keep coming back to, for all we know, for all I know, I'm just a curious person. I'm not, I don't have all the answers. I just want to ask the questions, and there's potency in the questions, I think. So that's what I was going after. But like you said, man, your point of view doesn't count, unless you're an expert, unless you have a authority to speak on it. What a silly thing to say. And like you said, did you just say it out loud?
Right.
That is so funny, but so true. And what's interesting, I think, is these ideas are infiltrating the academic world. They're infiltrating it in a way that, people, professors of philosophy, professors of religion, are engaging with this and writing about it, and giving a lot of. I think Jeff Kripal and Diana Pasulka, among others, have helped to give us a framework to talk about this. in a sober way that doesn't sound, and I'm not disparaging New Agey. I mean, I've dabbled, you know, New Agey in my own way, but it has a kind of a philosophical rigor to it. And I think we needed that kind of framework to talk to other people and to expand the conversation to include other people, other experiences, and
Mm-hmm.
open this up. Like you said, you know, there's a coming together. The book, if you've read Deep Weird, is it has a kind of constellation of the Fae people, ecological stories, psychedelic, ufology, and kind of brings it together to look at this idea of high strangeness, that it exists, it manifests in many ways. And it's not a single experience. So it's not one kind of thing where someone has a claim to, well, this is the one. You know, it could happen sitting in a church pew when you're a kid and you're looking up at the stained glass windows and you're kind of having a revelation. And you're not really supposed to because you're a punk, you know. I'm talking about me. And you hang out with punk friends who, you know, kind of toughies with leather jackets. And but there it is. There's the liminal space, and there's that opening to something else, to something bigger. You get out of the way of your ego controlling the situation, thinking it's in control.
It's yeah, I have a lot of different ways that I could respond to all of that. Thank you. Are you familiar with Josh Schray? Does
I'm
the Emerald podcast?
I'm not.
It's great. It's fantastic.
Mm,
It's a deep,
check it out.
really long form podcast, comes out not very often.
Mm,
And then he has a Patreon and study group. I really like his work, and a lot of his work is about myth and storytelling. And one of my favorite things that he says is that animism is normative consciousness, and just
mm,
reminding us that for most of human history, like the vast majority of human history, we were animists and
mhm,
lived in a populated world, and it was normal, and we understood, and we left offerings, and we weren't at the top of the food chain, and we understood that we were in relationship. Um,
mhm.
and he says it so clearly, and he's kind of a scholar of these things, and I'm not, so I trust what he says. And
Yeah.
but we're in this weird time where humans have forgotten all of that, and this is, to me, a way that it's coming back into the modern world through this phenomenon, which is
Hmm.
weird, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be in so many other ways, but yes, I say often, like, how did we start out with UFOs and end up at embodiment, or end
Hmm.
up at connection with trees? Like, it's such a
Hmm.
weird, unexpected path, but it is absolutely where it brings us to this place where we realize reality isn't what we thought it was, and it's a multiplicity. And to me, I would say it's both and. Like, to me, it seems that
Hmm.
there's a singularity that is all the things, all the things
Hmm.
of form, and then the multiplicity of all the things of form. And
Hmm.
even that is a multiplicity, but I do think there's some sort of like non-duality at the heart, but it still all is real and still all exists. And this is what it looks like to remember it in,
Hmm.
the West in 2024. It looks like congressional hearings and podcasts and people who've been like holding down this truth for 20 years by themselves. I think about those people a lot.
Hmm.
It's much easier to speak about these things now than it was 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. And we're not the first ones to recognize that this is going on. It's just now coming into the culture in a new way where we can talk about it. And to me, that's part of um, it's also very tied in with the things that we have as a collective repressed and
Mm-hmm.
didn't know that we were, because that's what the shadow is we don't know that we've shoved something down into the shadow, things that we don't want to look at or don't want to see. And so to me, it's all entwined with all the things that we've repressed, with um,
Agree.
the feminine,
Mm-hmm.
the natural world, the body of the
Mm-hmm.
earth, relational, interconnected. And I'm not a proponent of ditching the patriarchy for the matriarchy. Like I'm not into that. Uh, I'm hoping that as this continues, that we come into more unity and wholeness, and like unity and diversity and appreciation of diversity and all the different ways that the lenses that we have and the ways that we shine through. But all of this has been pushed down, like animism, the
Mm-hmm.
feminine, relationality, all of that. And as it's rising, it is coming through the lens of the things that we give power and validity to, which
Mm-hmm.
is academia, which is the government. It's just this reflection of like, oh, if they say it, it's real. And that makes sense, right? Because that's how we're set up. That's
Mm-hmm.
what this world is like right now. So that makes sense. And so I deeply understand that. And I love that where science and the mystical meet. And I love
Mm-hmm.
that religious scholars and all and academics are exploring this and bringing it into the collective consciousness instead of just the collective unconscious. And there is also a part of me that this is like a younger part that is a bit rebellious, that slightly rebels against that and is like, you know what? These are things I've known in my bones, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't really need the external world to validate it for me.
Right.
But that's just a part. Like I'm happy with the both, and I'm happy with kind of reclaiming our own deep knowing, which takes a while. Like it takes a minute to
Mm-hmm.
say, oh, actually, that experience, like I'm thinking of your book, the experience that I had on psychedelics where I communicated deeply with trees. And it was this seed that was planted. And then at some point it ripens, and I am now communicating with trees, and I believe myself instead of
Mm-hmm.
just being like, that was a weird, I don't know what that was. I think about it, but it's not. There's like these waves of deepening into these realities that happen that are, and to your point, both um, deeply internal and connected to the external. So there is a reflection happening, that as we deepen into these things and believe ourselves, um, it's being expressed in the external or vice versa. Like as the external collective starts to express and talk about this stuff, it's allowing this sort of mirror to happen in our internal worlds where we go, oh,
Mm-hmm.
like many people have said this, but I think I first heard it from Stuart Davis. Like if you ask anybody, and I have yet to have an experience where this isn't true, but ask somebody who says, no, I've never, that's cool that you have those experiences, but gosh, I just have no idea what you're talking about. And like dig a little deeper and like,
Mm-hmm.
you've never had anything weird happen to you.
Right.
And then they go, well, there was this one time. And
Yeah.
it's all the same. It's a very human thing, so.
Right. Yeah. And as you were saying that, I was thinking as above, so below was one
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
There is the part of what part of why I think it's so important to have some people help us frame this is that once you get into this subject, first of all, it's very elusive. It just, how come there are no rock solid photographs of how come it's slippery?
Mm-hmm.
How come when you look at it, it goes away like mercury? It just reforms. And why is it absurd? And it doesn't have the same kind of concrete, here is this piece of glass right now. Yes, we're getting data. Interesting that we're getting data from the pilots, well, the flight radar, infrared, other kinds of data, witness testimony, expert observers, witness testimony, although that's lowest on the rung, it seems, of validation. Um, this is hard stuff to talk about. It's very confusing. And so then I've gone and read, I'm telling you, like, my wife is getting, she's looking at the books coming in, and we live in a small place. So she's like, it's either them or me, and I'm like, honey, please. But this is a topic that by nature is extremely tricky, confounding. It's very part, and part of it is because it's you're looking at the underpinnings of consciousness itself. So we observe consciousness with consciousness. Tricky, confounding. Maybe there's something in there. Maybe there's something that's a part of this. And if someone says, "Well, it's just all in their heads," it's just all in their heads, and I think, so okay, so you think it's all in their heads. So all of these people who have these confounding experiences, some of them are not pleasant,
Hmm.
that sometimes can be so impactful to their lives that they can really damage their lives, or at least for a period of time. All of these people throughout time, across cultures, are you curious about why that happens then? Aren't you curious if it's just in their minds? Well, what's in our minds? Let's go there. Let's examine that. The institutions that set up that, you talked about, the government, and let's face it, it's the real who's really in control are the corporations. You know, they're really in control. They're the ones that are manufacturing reality. And their number one goal is to keep you away from your own sense of sacred, to keep you using gas, and to keep you, I realize the necessity for these things too, but to keep you hypnotized, you know, with uh, with consuming, and not connecting that consuming to its impact on the world. Because once you have that notion of the sacredness and the interconnectedness of all things, not just the terrestrial with the extraterrestrial, the earth with the cosmic, you become a liability. Now you're in the way. So the institutions and the academies feed from that too. And I mean, I went to, you know uh, I have a master's degree in English. Um, doesn't make me an academic, but there's a lot of roles in that world, and as much as it's beneficial, I'm not saying let's just throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's examine, as you say, let's integrate, let's include, and that's where this is going. And what had to jar this open is something as profound as, well, we're now getting these reports, and it's interesting the way the government responds to it. We have to protect our airspace, which, okay, fine, right? You're really gonna, yeah, sure, go ahead, protect the airspace with an object that moves at 85,000 miles an hour in 3 seconds. And but that's what's driving it, is to make everyone worry. I understand that. I understand the pilot should be safe. I'm not belittling that. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it's missing the opportunity in the mainstream, but it's eking out, and
Hmm.
it does make people think. And you say, so what they're saying is we're not the only sentient beings in the universe. And if you think about it, how absurd a notion that is. That's like Ptolemaic, like the earth. Here is the earth, and here is the universe surrounding to feed us, to be here for us. The God made the universe just for us. Okay. Seems highly improbable. I mean, it's a big place, it seems. For
Hmm.
as far as our telescopes can see, the visible universe is 6 septillion stars. That's a lot of stars, a lot of zeros. Two, we think, scientists believe, 2 trillion planets in the visible universe. And that's not the universe that suffuses our own? And what about the one that's interdimensionally suffusing through ours? The ones, how many? And is that what this is? Is that something coming through and, this kind of radio signal that's now kind of trapped in our world and buzzing, and it looks like an illuminated thing, but it has some other, there's a consciousness component to it. When Fravor, the pilot, he said they're doing their routes, and this thing appears, and it comes from out of the ocean into the sky. It drops down into the ocean in 3 seconds, 85,000 miles an hour. Then he said, there's this thing that pilots have, and I'm sure you've read it and you know it, and I'm just repeating it. It's like when you're playing sports, if you're on a soccer team or a football team, you have a kind of a center point, you agree on. This is the place where we meet when all things go afoul. Cap point, it's called. This object appeared at the cap point, which is something only they know. As if to say, yeah, I got my eyes on you. And I'm being silly here a little bit, because I think we need to bring some humor to this too. We should bring joy and humor to it as well, as potentially terrifying and awestruck we can be. I can't help, I'm playful, And I want to make one more point, to cap off my long soliloquy. What you noticed in the book, and what I wanted to make clear, is that kid who, ostensibly me, I think when I was 16, I was a rebellious kid. I didn't want to go work for some place. I didn't want to participate, in the kind of, and that's a complex thing. That's a whole other subject. What was wrong with me too. But I have to give that kid some credit. That kid wasn't completely yet polluted by all of the corporate stuff that's poured down into you, and was still looking at the world wide-eyed, deeply engaging with music. Okay, maybe smoking a little too much weed. The psychedelics, no joke. That's sacred stuff. That's not playing around stuff. That's you looking up close at yourself, and how yourself looks at the world, and how the world looks at you while you're looking at yourself, looking at the world. And it's that complex and confusing and layered. But that kid, I think, in a way, before the complete adulteration happened, there was something there. There's something pure. And corruption of your mind can lead to other layers of experience and revelation. Just wanted to point out, it's in the Castaneda books. Carlos Castaneda says to Don Juan, there's a young boy, and they're in Don Juan's village, and he's living poor, playing in the water, mud on his body, and Carlos Castaneda says something to Don Juan. Oh, this poor kid, he'll never, experience this. He'll never have opportunities for. And Don Juan says, he's probably better off than you. He probably sees things more clearly than you do in your botched mind, loaded with preconceptions. So, shut up. Something like that. There's a real truth to that. And yeah, it was interesting to create the time loop and the revelation that happens, that this is all kind of coming back to that moment, that those two moments in time are connected. And while it's a fiction book, I think there's something to it as well. I mean, that was the most profound experience of my life, period. And it happened a long time ago. And it was both terrifying and I wouldn't trade it for $1 million. Well, maybe, no, I'm just kidding. 2 million. Um, no, it's the most important experience of my life. It's, I went to college, I studied philosophy and psychology, and in a way, recovering from that and trying to understand it. And here I am now writing books based on that, inspired by that journey that began there, and that very dangerous, thing to puncture my consciousness, the way a shaman, or an experiencer has, that you are just shocked. You are just shocked into another way of looking at the world.
Yeah. All of that. So beautiful. Thank you so much. And I
Well,
have to
thank you.
say, yeah, oh, it's my pleasure. I have to say, I have, and this comes through some people in my very close friend group, but we have this idea of power words.
Mm,
And so an example would be, a power word would be grace, or
mm.
grief. And one of my power words is absurd. It's such a powerful word and is such a good word to describe so many of these experiences. And
Mhm.
like you said as well, bringing the lightness and the humor and the joy into it. That's part of our humanness as well. It's very
Mhm.
powerful, and kind of overlooked how important humor and joy is. And so that to me is why that is a power word, the word absurd. But
Mm.
yeah, I mean, just what you spoke so beautifully. I don't really have a lot to add on to it. Just thank you. Thank you for writing this book. Thank you for continuing to write. Congratulations on your award for
Oh, thank
falling
you.
out of trees.
Thank you.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
thank you.
Yeah,
And
and it's
thank you for having me on here, Robin. And it's been the magical way that we met through a kind of post here and there. And
mhm,
I have a feeling we're gonna, know each other for a good long time, and not just on Zoom calls. And
yeah,
but it's really an honor to have gotten to know you, and it's fun to be on the podcast and to talk, but just to get to know you, period.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. I feel the same way. Right. Random posts on Instagram,
Right.
and then bizarrely, absurdly finding ourselves at the conference in New York together.
Right.
Weird. That's weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's strange. Um, yeah, so really wonderful, and
Yeah.
really grateful for the connection for sure. And
Me too.
thank you for the books and for sending them. And I hope lots of people read it. When is it? Is it out?
It's available for pre-order. I actually have
Okay.
some now. So now I have some. I have the final print. So first
Mhm.
you get the advanced review copies and you kind of go through and check for errors. And even after 700 hours of review and the publisher's editor, there was still some minor blemishes, but stuff. I'm not an editor, but even the editors miss things. So, but
It's
yeah, it's
amazing.
available. It's just incredible. It's almost impossible, but it could be pre-ordered if someone doesn't want to order it from me. But if they want to order it from me, I could send it to you. And you can go to MikeFiorito.com if you want to just take a look at the book, take a look at what some people have said, and if you have any questions. And I'm excited to see. It'll be out in May, officially publishing. I do believe it'll come out sooner though,
Mm-hmm.
so I think it'll trickle out sooner than that.
Yeah, it's yes, to your point about editing, like hundreds of hours working with multiple different editors. And
Right.
who was it? It was Mike Cleland who said, look, you're going to get the book and you're going to open it to a random page and find a typo.
Right.
Just accept it. That's what's
Yeah.
going to happen when the book arrives in your hands. And pretty much exactly what he said. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, so that's amazing. Yeah, and I hope that I'm sure that people will engage with this book. It's really beautiful. And I don't know about you, but one of my favorite things are the connections that these stories
Yeah.
and these
Absolutely.
kinds of things make. So when people engage with my work and then take the time to send me, their story or to reach
Hmm.
out. I love it. And I imagine that you do as well. So
I really do.
yeah,
That's
share your
as
stories with
important
Mike.
as, yeah, as well. And I'm actually interviewing people about, music related stories, how it relates to the phenomena. So that's a gift
Mm,
to have these wonderful stories and connections like you. And by and large, people are, they're really sweet and nice and generous. I feel
mhm.
very grateful to be included. So thank you for including me and keeping the conversation going.
Yeah.
Let's cause some trouble.
Let's do it. I'm ready. I'm ready. All right, Mike. Well, thank you so much. Have a wonderful Saturday and
Thank you. You
we'll talk
too. Thanks for
soon.
getting up early, Robin. And
Yeah.
I will talk to you. I'll be listening to your podcast, Earth, a Love Story.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you so much to Mike Fiorito, and thank you to Morgan Jenks for our musical soundscapes. If you'd like information about joining the Bridge Collective, or if you'd like to learn more about my work, or book a one-on-one session with me, please visit honeyheart.org.